The mud on Kasara 7 was the color of old rust, and it got into everything. It got into boots, into rifles, into food rations, and into the souls of every soldier unlucky enough to be stationed on this miserable planet. The war against the Corvani Dominion had been going on for 18 months now, and the mud had been there for every single day of it. Cadet Danny Marsh stood at the edge of Trench 19 and looked out at the empty valley below. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It would have been beautiful if not for the distant sound of artillery somewhere to the north. The real fighting was happening there. The important fighting. Danny was not part of the important fighting. He turned around when he heard footsteps behind him. Sergeant Lisa Grant was walking toward him with that look on her face. It was the look she always had when she was about to give him an assignment he would not like. Danny had seen that look many times in his 3 months on Kasara 7. "Marsh," Lisa said, "we just got orders. Command wants us to reinforce the main line. The Corvani are massing for a big push." Danny felt his heart jump. Finally, a chance to do something that mattered. He had spent most of the war doing small tasks that any computer could handle. Watching screens, checking equipment, making coffee runs for the senior soldiers. He was ready for real action. "I need you to stay here," Lisa said. The words hit Danny like a punch to the stomach. "What?" "Someone has to watch the sensor array. Command wants eyes on this valley just in case." Lisa shrugged. "It's probably nothing. The Corvani have no reason to come through here. But regulations say we need someone on post." Danny looked around at the crumbling trench. Most of the defensive systems were old and barely working. The bunker was cold and smelled like mold. This was not a strategic position. This was a forgotten corner of a forgotten battlefield. "Why me?" Danny asked, though he already knew the answer. Lisa did not say anything cruel. She did not need to. Danny knew what everyone thought of him. He was the cadet who had shown up to his first day on Kasara 7 with coffee stains on his uniform. He was the one who had accidentally fired a flare gun during a stealth briefing and nearly gave away their position to enemy scouts. He was the soldier that commanders did not trust with important missions. "Just watch the screens," Lisa said. "Report anything unusual. Try not to break anything. We'll be back in a day or two once the main assault is dealt with." She started to walk away, then stopped and looked back at him. For a moment, Danny thought she might say something encouraging. Something like, "I believe in you," or "You can handle this." Instead, she said, "There's instant coffee in the supply cabinet." Then she was gone, taking the rest of the squad with her. Danny watched the transport vehicles disappear over the northern ridge until the sound of their engines faded into nothing. He was alone. The bunker was exactly as depressing as he expected. There was a single chair in front of a wall of old screens, a cot in the corner that looked like it had not been cleaned in months, a small heater that made strange clicking noises. And yes, there was a cabinet full of instant coffee packets, next to a water recycler that produced liquid that was technically safe to drink. Danny made himself a cup of coffee. It tasted terrible, but it was warm, and that was something. He sat down in the chair and looked at the screens. They showed heat signatures, motion sensors, atmospheric readings, and a dozen other measurements that painted a picture of the valley below. Right now, that picture was boring. Nothing was moving out there except some small animals that the computer automatically filtered out. The valley was empty. The war was somewhere else. Danny thought about his family back on Earth. His mother had cried when he told her he was joining the Colonial Defense Force. His father had been proud, but worried. His younger sister had made him promise to come home with exciting stories. What story would he tell her about this? I sat in a bunker and watched empty screens while everyone else fought the real battle. He finished his coffee and made another cup. The caffeine was making his hands shake a little, but it kept him alert. That was the only thing he could do right now. Stay alert. Watch the screens. Follow orders. 2 hours passed. Nothing happened. Danny was starting to believe that nothing would happen. Lisa was right. This valley was worthless. The Kovanni had no reason to come through here when the real prize was the human supply lines to the north. Then he saw something. It was just a flicker on the thermal imaging screen. A small heat signature that appeared for half a second and then vanished. Danny leaned forward in his chair. He adjusted the settings, trying to get a clearer picture. There it was again. A brief flash of warmth in the cold valley, and then nothing. Standard protocol said to log the anomaly and wait for confirmation. It was probably just a sensor glitch. The equipment in this trench was old and unreliable. False readings happened all the time, but Danny kept watching. He saw another flicker, then another. They were not random. They appeared in a pattern, moving from west to east across the valley floor. Something was out there. Something that was trying very hard not to be seen. Danny felt his blood run cold. He had sat through a lecture at the academy about Corvani stealth technology. Most cadets had been half asleep during that class, but Danny remembered one detail. The Corvani had developed thermal dampening suits that could hide their soldiers from standard sensors. The suits were not perfect. They left brief signatures when the wearer moved too quickly. Brief signatures, like flickers on a thermal screen. Danny grabbed the radio and tried to contact command. Static. He tried again. More static. The atmospheric interference from recent orbital bombardments was blocking long-range communications. He found a backup frequency and managed to reach a relay station. A tired voice answered. Private Amy Teller. Relay Station 7. What's your situation? This is Cadet Marsh at Trench 19, Danny said. I'm picking up possible enemy movement in the valley. Multiple contacts using thermal dampening. I need to reach command immediately. There was a pause. Trench 19? I thought the position was abandoned. It was supposed to be. I stayed behind to watch the sensors. Please, I need to get this information to command. I think the Corvani are trying to flank our main force. Amy sighed. I'll try to patch you through, but it could take hours with this interference. The communication grid is a mess right now. Hours. Danny looked at the screen. The flickers were still moving, and there were more of them now. Dozens of heat signatures, maybe hundreds, all creeping through the valley toward the unprotected rear of the human defensive line. By the time his message reached command, it would be too late. The Corvani would be behind friendly lines. The main force would be surrounded. Danny took a deep breath. He could not stop an army, but maybe, just maybe, he could slow them down. He started looking through the bunker's inventory, searching for anything he could use. And he began to form a plan. The bunker's inventory was not impressive. Danny found one anti-armor turret with limited ammunition, a box of old smoke grenades, trip flares that were probably older than he was, a speaker system that was meant for broadcasting emergency messages, and enough broken equipment to fill a small warehouse. He also found his personal music player in his pocket and a terrible idea forming in his mind. The Corvani were moving slowly through the valley. They thought they were invisible. They thought the trench was empty, and they could walk right past it on their way to slaughter the human forces from behind. Danny needed to change their thinking. He started with the lights. The trench had perimeter floodlights installed along its entire length. They were meant to illuminate attackers during a night assault. Danny found the control panel and started turning them on in a random pattern. One section would light up, then go dark. Then, another section would activate somewhere else. From the valley below, it would look like soldiers were moving along the trench. Like the position was manned and active. Danny watched the thermal screen. The enemy signatures stopped moving. They had noticed the lights. Good. That was good. But it was not enough. He activated the motion-activated sonic deterrents. These were simple devices meant to scare away the large predators that lived on Kasara 7. They produced a loud, unpleasant sound whenever something moved near them. Danny adjusted their settings and spread them across the trench perimeter. Now the enemy would not just see activity. They would hear it too. But he needed more. He needed voices. Danny connected his music player to the old speaker system. He did not play music. Instead, he played recordings. Every soldier carried personal messages from home, recordings of family and friends. Danny had recordings of his sister telling jokes, and his mother singing old songs and his father giving advice about life. He played these recordings on a loop, adjusting the volume so it sounded like quiet conversation. From a distance, the enemy would hear human voices. They would think soldiers were talking to each other. Amy's voice came through his radio. "Marsh, what are you doing?" "I'm picking up strange readings from your position." "I'm making noise," Danny said. "I'm trying to make them think this trench is defended." "That's insane." "You're one person." "I know. But if they think we're ready for them, maybe they'll hesitate. Maybe that will buy enough time for my message to reach command." There was silence on the radio. Then Amy said, "Your message is still trying to get through. The interference is bad. It could be hours. Then I need to hold them for hours." Danny grabbed a cup of coffee and took a long drink. His hands were shaking more now. Fear and caffeine were mixing together in his blood. On the thermal screen, the enemy signatures had stopped their advance. They were holding position in the valley, probably trying to figure out what was happening. Danny allowed himself a small moment of hope. Then the signatures started moving again. But they were not moving toward the main force anymore. They were moving toward the trench. They were sending scouts. Danny rushed to the anti-armor turret. It was a fixed-position weapon mounted near the bunker entrance. He had limited ammunition, maybe 20 shots. He could not waste them. He watched the scouts approach on the sensor screen. There were 6 of them, moving in pairs, using cover and shadows like trained professionals. These were not regular soldiers. These were Corvani elite scouts. Danny waited until they reached the outer perimeter. Then he triggered the trip flares. The valley exploded in white light. The flares were old, but they still worked. The sudden brightness would blind anyone using night vision equipment. The scouts stumbled and shouted in confusion. Danny fired the turret 3 times. He did not aim to kill. He aimed at the ground near them, kicking up dirt and rock. The explosions added to the chaos. Then he threw 2 smoke grenades into the valley. The smoke mixed with the dying light of the flares, creating a wall of white fog. Through the chaos, Danny shouted through the speaker system. Just nonsense words, but loud and aggressive. "Fall back to position 2. Covering fire. Do you see the flanking movement?" The scouts retreated. They ran back to their main force, probably to report that the trench was heavily defended and the humans had been waiting for them. Danny collapsed into his chair, breathing hard. His heart was pounding so fast, he could feel it in his throat. He had done it. He had fooled them. But for how long? Amy came back on the radio. "I saw the flares from here. Are you okay?" "I'm alive," Danny said. The scouts pulled back. "I think I convinced them this position is dangerous." "You convinced them with 3 shots and some flares?" "And a lot of noise." Danny laughed. It was not a happy laugh. "I don't know how long this will work. Their commander has to be suspicious." He was right. On the sensor screen, he could see movement in the enemy force. They were reorganizing. They were not retreating, but they were not advancing either. They were trying to understand what they were facing. Danny knew that every minute they waited was a minute for his message to reach command. Every minute was a minute for reinforcements to prepare for the surprise attack. He made another cup of coffee, his fourth of the night. His hands were shaking so badly that he spilled some on his uniform. Another coffee stain to add to his collection. The radio crackled. "Marsh, I've been monitoring enemy communications. I can't understand most of it, but I'm picking up one word over and over." "What word?" "I don't know the exact translation, but it sounds like a name. Vethral. I think it might be their commander." Danny closed his eyes for a moment. He had heard that name in intelligence briefings. Commander Vethral was a legend among the Corvani military. He had commanded armies for 40 cycles. He had never lost a siege. And now Danny was trying to fool him with floodlights and trip flares. "Amy," Danny said quietly, "I need you to stay on the radio with me tonight. I don't think I can do this alone." "I'm not going anywhere," Amy replied. "Tell me what you need." Danny looked at the sensor screen. The enemy force was still there, thousands of soldiers waiting in the valley. And above them, the stars were coming out, cold and distant and indifferent to the small drama playing out below. It was going to be a long night. Danny finished his coffee and started planning his next move. Somewhere out there, Commander Vethral was doing the same thing. The difference was that Vethral had an army. Danny had instant coffee and a broken speaker system. But he also had something the Corvani commander did not expect. He had the stubborn refusal to accept that he had already lost. And that, Danny was starting to realize, might be worth more than all the armies in the galaxy. The long night was just beginning. Commander Vethra stood on a ridge overlooking the valley and studied the human trench through his tactical display. Something was wrong. Everything about this situation felt wrong. His intelligence reports had been clear. The humans had abandoned Trench 19. It was a worthless position with no strategic value. The perfect path for his flanking force to move through undetected. But now there were lights, sounds, weapons fire. His scouts reported a defended position with prepared ambush points. Vethral had been fighting wars for longer than most humans had been alive. He had learned to trust his instincts. And right now, his instincts were telling him that something was not right. "Send another probe," he ordered his officers. 3 teams this time. Different approach angles. I want to know exactly what we're facing. In the bunker, Danny saw the movement on his screens. More signatures breaking away from the main force. 3 groups this time, spreading out to approach the trench from different directions. He took a deep breath. The first deception had worked because it was unexpected. This time, the enemy would be more careful. They would be watching for tricks. Danny could not use the same approach twice. He needed to think of something new. He moved to the east side of the trench and positioned himself near a secondary weapon mount. It was an old automatic defense gun, the kind that fired in preset patterns. Danny set it to fire a short burst every 30 seconds. Aimed at nothing in particular. Then he ran to the west side and found another gun. Same setup. Random bursts at random intervals. Now the trench sounded like it had multiple defenders firing independently. The first enemy team approached from the north. Danny hit them with flares again, but this time he added something new. He had found a box of old decoy drones in the supply storage. They were meant to confuse enemy targeting systems by projecting false heat signatures. Danny launched 3 of them toward the northern team. The drones flew in erratic patterns, looking like human soldiers running between positions. The enemy opened fire on them, wasting ammunition on ghosts. The second team came from the east. Danny was waiting for them with the last of his smoke grenades. He threw them into the path of the advancing soldiers, then used the speaker system to broadcast the sound of shouting voices from multiple directions. The Corvani soldiers stopped, confused. They could not see through the smoke. They could hear humans all around them. Their tactical training told them they were walking into a crossfire. They retreated. The third team was smarter. They moved slowly, carefully, not reacting to any of Danny's tricks. They had figured out that something was strange about this defense. They wanted to see with their own eyes what was really in the trench. Danny watched them getting closer. He had almost no ammunition left for the anti-armor turret. The decoy drones were destroyed. He was running out of options. Amy's voice came through the radio. "They're getting close, Danny. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Danny admitted. "I'm almost out of tricks." He looked around the bunker desperately. There had to be something. Anything. His eyes fell on the water recycler. It was connected to the trench's old irrigation system. This planet was dry, and the original colonists had built water distribution pipes throughout their fortifications. Danny had an idea. A stupid, desperate idea. He accessed the irrigation controls and found what he was looking for. The pipes ran under the ground in front of the trench. If he increased the pressure enough, he could make the pipes burst. He pushed the system to its maximum. Warning lights flashed. The pump screamed in protest. And then the ground in front of the advancing enemy team exploded upward in a geyser of muddy water. The Corvai soldiers scattered in panic. They thought they had triggered a buried explosive. They thought the humans had mined the approach. Then he kept the water flowing as long as the system would allow. When it finally gave out, the ground in front of the trench had become a muddy swamp. Any approach from that direction would be slow and visible. The third team retreated like the others. On the ridge, Commander Vethro received the reports from his probe teams. Automatic weapons fire from multiple positions. Decoy drones. Smoke screens. Now buried water traps that turn the ground into mud. This was not an abandoned trench. This was a carefully prepared defensive position. The humans had known about his flanking maneuver. They had been waiting for him. Vethro made a decision. He would not advance until dawn. Moving against a prepared enemy in darkness was foolish. His forces would hold position and wait for daylight, when they could see exactly what they were facing. In the bunker, Danny saw the enemy signatures stop moving. They were setting up camp in the valley. They were not advancing. He had bought more time. "Amy," he said into the radio. They stopped. "They're waiting." "I heard." "Danny, that was incredible. How did you know about the water pipes?" "I didn't. I was just desperate." Danny sat down heavily in his chair. The adrenaline was starting to fade, and exhaustion was taking its place. He had been awake for over 20 hours now. His body was screaming for sleep, but he could not sleep. The enemy was still out there. If they decided to advance again, he needed to be ready. He made another cup of coffee. His hands were shaking so badly that he could barely hold the cup. He did not care about the taste anymore. He just needed the caffeine to keep him awake. The hours crawled by. Every few minutes, Danny checked the screens. The enemy force remained in position, but they were watching, waiting, planning. Sometime around midnight, Amy spoke again. "I'm still trying to get your message through. The communication grid is slowly improving. Maybe another 2 hours." 2 hours, Danny repeated. It felt like a lifetime. He walked around the bunker to keep himself awake. He talked to Amy about nothing important. Her home planet, his family, favorite foods, stupid jokes from their academy days. He tried not to think about what would happen if the enemy decided to attack in force. He tried not to think about how one cadet with no ammunition and no real weapons could stop an army. Instead, he focused on the next minute. Then, the next minute after that. One moment at a time. That was all he could do. The clock showed 100 hours. Still 5 hours until dawn. Danny looked out at the valley through a small window in the bunker. He could see the faint glow of the enemy camp in the distance. Thousands of soldiers, all waiting for the right moment to continue their march. and standing between them and the human forces was just Danny. A broken bunker and the stubborn refusal to give up. He finished his coffee and started planning for the next probe. Because there would be a next probe. Commander Vethral had not become a legend by being patient forever. The night was only half over, and Danny knew the hardest part was still coming. At 0300 hours, Commander Vethral lost his patience. He had been watching the human trench for hours. He had received reports of weapons fire, explosions, and traps. He had lost time that he could not afford to lose. The main assault on the human defensive line was happening right now, and his flanking force was sitting uselessly in a valley because of one small trench dot enough, he decided. It was time to find out the truth. Send 50 soldiers, he ordered. Full combat formation. I want that trench cleared within the hour. The order went out. 50 of his best soldiers began their advance across the valley floor. They moved in disciplined lines, covering each other, ready for anything in the bunker. Danny saw them coming. 50 signatures on the thermal screen. Moving fast. Moving together. This was not a probe. This was an assault force. Danny checked his supplies. He had 2 shots left in the anti-armor turret. No more flares. No more smoke grenades. No more decoy drones. The water system was broken from his earlier trick. He had nothing left. Amy, he said into the radio, his voice steady despite the fear. They're sending a full force. 50 soldiers. There was silence on the other end. Then Amy said, your message reached command. They're sending reinforcements to the main line. But Danny, they can't send anyone to help you. The battle up north is too intense. Danny nodded, even though Amy could not see him. He had expected that. Help was not coming. He watched the enemy advance on his screen. They were getting closer with every passing second. In a few minutes, they would reach the trench. They would find one exhausted cadet with no ammunition and no weapons. And then they would kill him and continue their march. Danny thought about his family. His mother. His father. His sister. He thought about all the things he had wanted to do with his life. All the places he had wanted to see. All the stories he would never get to tell. Then he thought about the soldiers at the main defensive line. If the Corvani flanking force got through, those soldiers would be surrounded. They would be slaughtered. Hundreds of humans would die because one army had walked past one empty trench. No, not empty. Danny was here. He was still standing. He was still fighting. And suddenly, he remembered something. It was a lecture from the academy. A boring class about alien psychology that most cadets had slept through. Danny had been half asleep too, but he remembered one detail. One interesting fact about Corvani culture. The Corvani valued honor above everything. They considered it shameful to lose soldiers to tricks and traps. They respected enemies who faced them directly, but they despised those who used deception to win. Danny had spent the entire night using deception. Lights, sounds, fake soldiers, water traps. He had fooled the Corvani over and over again. If they discovered the truth now, they would be humiliated. They would be the army that was stopped by one human with a broken speaker system. That shame would follow them forever. Danny made a decision. The most dangerous decision of his life. He put down his coffee cup. He took off his helmet and set it aside. He walked to the bunker entrance and stepped outside into the cold night air. The enemy soldiers were close now. Close enough to see with their own eyes. Close enough to hear. Danny raised his hands above his head. Not in surrender. In the Corvani gesture of formal challenge. He had seen it in training videos. Arms up, palms open, facing the enemy. It meant, I acknowledge you as worthy opponents. Face me with honor. The advancing soldiers stopped. They stared at the lone human standing in the trench, making their sacred gesture. Danny's translator crackled as he spoke. His voice was calm. He did not feel calm, but his voice was steady. "Soldiers of the Corvani Dominion," he said. "I am Cadet Danny Marsh. I am alone." The soldiers exchanged confused looks. This was not what they expected. "I have deceived you," Danny continued. "All night, I have used tricks and noise to make you believe this trench was defended. There are no other humans here. There are no weapons. There are no traps. There is only me." One of the Corvani officers spoke into his radio, reporting to Commander Vethral. Danny waited. "Your main assault on our defensive line has failed," Danny said. "While you waited in this valley, our forces crushed your attack. Your flanking maneuver was the key to victory, and I stopped it. One cadet with a broken speaker system and some instant coffee." He lowered his hands and stood straight, facing the enemy soldiers. "You can kill me now. It would be easy. I have no weapons. I have no way to stop you. But if you do, you will have to explain to your commanders how an entire army was held at bay by a single human. You will have to admit that the Corvani Dominion was fooled by a coffee-stained boy who was considered too worthless to join the real battle." Danny pointed at the valley floor, where the mud from the broken water pipes was still fresh. "I used your fear against you. I made you see ghosts. I made you hesitate when you should have attacked. And because of that hesitation, your mission has failed." He met the eyes of the nearest Corvani soldier. The alien stared back at him with an expression Danny could not read. "That is the truth," Danny said. "Now you have a choice. Kill me and carry this shame forever. Or admit that you faced an enemy who was worthy of your respect." The soldiers did not move. They stood frozen in the darkness, uncertain what to do with this strange human who had just confessed to deceiving them, and then demanded their respect for doing it. Danny waited. His heart was pounding so hard he could barely breathe. He had just revealed that he was defenseless. He had just invited them to kill him, but he had also given them a choice. And if he understood Corvani culture correctly, that choice mattered. One of the officers spoke into his radio again. A long conversation in the Corvani language that Danny could not understand. Then silence. The soldiers held their position. They did not advance. They did not retreat. They waited for orders from their commander, and in his command post on the ridge, Commander Vethral stared at the video feed showing one exhausted human standing alone in a trench. And he began to understand that this night had changed everything. The clock showed 400 hours. Dawn was still 2 hours away. Danny stood in the cold night air and waited to learn if he would live or die. He had nothing left. No weapons. No tricks. No deceptions. He had only the truth. And he had offered it to his enemies like a gift. Now he would find out if they were worthy of receiving it. The first light of dawn was breaking over Kisara 7 when Commander Vethral walked down from the ridge. He walked alone. No guards, no soldiers. Just an old commander moving through the valley toward the trench, where one human had stood against his entire army. Danny had been standing in the same spot for nearly 2 hours. His legs ached. His body was shaking from exhaustion and cold. But he refused to sit down. He refused to show weakness. He watched the Corvani commander approach. Vethral was tall, even by the standards of his species. His armor was decorated with symbols of rank and achievement. His face was weathered by decades of war. He stopped a few meters from Danny and studied the human for a long moment. "You are young," Vethral said through his translator. His voice was deep and rough. "Yes," Danny replied. "You are afraid. Yes. Yet you stand before me without weapons, without protection. You revealed your deception, and then demanded that I respect you for it." Vethral tilted his head. "I have fought humans for many cycles. I've never seen one do this. Danny did not know what to say, so he said nothing. Vethril walked closer. He looked around at the trench, at the broken equipment, at the empty bunker. He saw the coffee cups scattered around the entrance. He saw the speaker system that had broadcast the voices of Danny's family throughout the night. "You helped my army with this," Vethril said. It was not a question. "I held your army with whatever I could find," Danny said. "I did not have much." The Kovanni commander was quiet for a moment. Then he made a sound that Danny eventually realized was laughter. "I have conquered worlds," Vethril said. "I have broken fortresses that were defended by thousands of soldiers with the best weapons their civilizations could create. I have never been stopped by a single enemy." He looked at Danny with something that might have been respect, until tonight. Vethril reached up and touched his chest with his right hand. Then he bowed his head slightly. Danny recognized the gesture from his academy training. It was the Corvani acknowledgement of honorable defeat. "My culture has a concept that does not translate well into your language," Vethril said. "The closest meaning is victory through worthiness. When an enemy defeats you through courage, cunning, and will, they have not truly defeated you. They have proven that they deserve to win." He gestured at the valley, at his waiting army. "I could order my soldiers to kill you now. We could continue our march. But what would we be marching toward? A battle that has already been lost. Your forces destroyed our main assault while we waited here. The flanking maneuver was our only chance for victory, and you stopped it." Vethril straightened to his full height. "If I kill you now, I gain nothing but shame. The shame of destroying a worthy enemy who had already defeated me. That is not something I am willing to carry." Danny felt his legs start to give out. He locked his knees and forced himself to stay standing. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now we withdraw," Vethril said. "My army will return to our territory. The battle for Kesar 7 is over. You have won." He turned and began walking back toward his forces. Then he stopped and looked over his shoulder. "Tell your commanders that the Corvani do not forget. We will remember the human who stood alone against an army. We will remember the coffee-stained cadet who refused to accept defeat." Vethril's voice carried across the valley. "And we will be more careful the next time we underestimate your kind." Danny watched him go. He watched the entire army begin to move. Thousands of soldiers turning away from the valley and marching back, the way they had come. He stood there until they disappeared over the horizon. Then his legs finally gave out, and he collapsed against the bunker wall. Amy's voice came through the radio. She was crying. Danny, I heard everything. Are you okay?" "I'm okay," Danny said. His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm okay." He closed his eyes and let the exhaustion wash over him. He had been awake for over 30 hours. He had fought an entire night with nothing but tricks and stubbornness. He had faced a legendary commander and survived. He was asleep before he heard the sound of approaching vehicles. Sergeant Lisa Grant arrived at Trench 19 3 hours later. She expected to find a bored cadet eating ration packs and complaining about the boring assignment. Instead, she found Danny Marsh asleep on the bunker steps, surrounded by empty coffee cups and broken equipment. And she found a formal message waiting on the communication system, transmitted from the Corvani command frequency. The message was in the Corvani language, but the translation was attached. It said, "This position is defended by a worthy enemy. Approach with respect." Lisa read the message 3 times before she believed it. The story of Trench 19 spread quickly through the human forces. Then it spread to the Colonial Council. Then it spread to Earth itself. Danny woke up to find himself famous. He had not asked for fame. He had not wanted it. He had just been trying to do his job. Watch the screens. Report anything unusual. Try not to break anything. When reporters asked him how he had done it, Danny did not have a good answer. He told them the truth. He had been scared. He had been desperate. He had been running on caffeine and stubbornness, but somehow that had been enough. Months later, an intelligence report crossed the desk of a colonial general. It was an analysis of Kovanni military communications. Since the Battle of Kasara 7, the analysts had noticed something interesting. The Kovanni had started using a new term to describe humans in their tactical documents, a word that roughly translated to those who do not know when to stop. It was included in warnings about engaging human forces. It was used in training materials for young soldiers. The Kovanni meant it as a warning, a reminder that humans were dangerous because they refused to accept defeat, even when defeat was certain. But when the humans learned about this new name, they did not see it as an insult. They saw it as a compliment. And somewhere on Earth, a young woman received a letter from her brother. In it, Danny described everything that had happened on Kasara 7. He described the fear and the exhaustion and the long night of desperate tricks. He described standing alone against an army and refusing to back down. At the end of the letter, Danny asked his sister if this was the kind of exciting story she had wanted him to bring home. She wrote back immediately. Her answer was 3 words long. Tell me more. Danny smiled when he read it, and he started writing another letter, describing the next chapter of his life. Because for a coffee-stained cadet who had learned that stubbornness could be a weapon, there were many more stories waiting to be told. The war for Kasara 7 was over. But for Danny Marsh, everything was just beginning.